Дякую. Максимально цікаве питання, де ми знаходимося зараз. Я хочу сподіватися, що ми все ж таки на шляху до кардинального вирішення нашої війни, яка, ще раз хотів би всім нагадати, є найкривавішою і найжахливішою подією і війною на території Європи після завершення Другої світової війни і точно однією з найбільш кривавих за всю історію, скажімо так, поствоєнну історію світу. Ми рухаємось. Не можна сказати, що ось завтра наступить мир, гарантовано. Це, якщо хтось так говорить, це точно неправда. Але робиться дуже багато зусиль. Перш за все, робляться зусилля з нашого боку, з боку Сполучених Штатів Америки. Подобається це комусь чи не подобається, але цей рух є. Він насправді існує, і ми насправді просуваємось. Чи зможемо ми досягти успіху в найближчій перспективі чи ні, також багато в чому залежить від Російської Федерації. Ви розумієте, з ким ми маємо справу, не думаю, що треба якісь зайві слова в цьому питанні. Підсумовуючи, скажімо так, це вступне слово, кажу прямо, ми рухаємось. І стриманий оптимізм – це той термін, який би я використав для чіткого окреслення даної ситуації. Дякую.
Thank you, Mr. Budanov. Minister Vалтонен, if there's any country, apart from Ukraine, that understands, I guess, Russia and Russia's history of aggression, I would argue it's probably Finland. And we've seen many meetings in recent weeks of European leaders to discuss the conflict in Ukraine and where we're headed. What's your best guess for where we end up and what that will mean for Europe? Where do you think this conflict pauses?
Well, thank you for the introduction, but the only thing I have to correct is that, yes, we do have, unfortunately, quite some experience with Russia and Russian aggression over the course of the past, not only decades, but years, hundreds of years. But I still don't understand Russia, and I certainly don't sympathize with the imperialistic ambitions of that country that's apparently still is ongoing. Now, we would hope for peace, but for a peace to last, it needs to be just, it needs to be genuine. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any concessions on the side of Russia to reach a proper peace deal in Ukraine. And let's face it, it was Russia almost 4 years ago who started the invasion in the first place. And it could be Russia yesterday, today, tomorrow to decide that there's no war. What we need to do now collectively is that we increase the pressure on Russia, because we do see that that country is in economic decline and will be so also long into the future. They won't have any strategic benefit over the course of the coming years. The only thing is, of course, that they are apparently willing to lose their last man and use their final ruble on the war of aggression. But we can't allow that to happen, and I think as the free world, we need to stay the course and keep on supporting Ukraine, ramp up the pressure on Russia, and third, and this I'm taking home to Europe in general, we should be massively now investing in our defense and deterrence. And I think the decisions made last summer in The Hague were exactly the right ones, and certainly also something which Finland has been driving for many, many years, since we have taken our defense and deterrence very seriously, always.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Anand, could I ask you, Canada is a member of NATO. Canada is one of the closest neighbours to the United States, obviously. How involved do you think NATO is at this point in the negotiations, in the plans to end this conflict, or is it really just in the hands of the President of the United States?
Well, I guess I will, first of all, thank you for having me here, and hello, everyone. And obviously, I'm very happy that we're having a panel about Ukraine to discuss Ukraine, because, as you suggested, the attention is being diverted away from the potential ceasefire that has been on the table, and the very point, and I want to underline this, that there should be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. This is fundamentally important as we consider the 20-point peace plan, as we discuss the security guarantees and the efforts of the coalition of the willing. The fundamental principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty of states is what Canada believes to be the driver of the negotiations and the outcome. Again, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And Canada has a distinct relationship with Ukraine, not just as a NATO member, not as the neighbor of the United States, but a distinct relationship with Ukraine. We have, outside of Russia, the largest population of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine. We have put the largest per capita amount of support, financial support towards Ukraine, military, economic, financial, infrastructure-related support at $22.5 billion for a country of 40 million, or a country of 40 million people. We are co-leading the effort to bring Ukrainian children home, and have spearheaded that vis-a-vis 20,000 Ukrainian children. Will be holding a worldwide conference in the fall in Toronto to ensure that we're bringing countries on the return of Ukrainian children home. I just stress this to reiterate that our foreign policy vis-a-vis Ukraine is distinct, and it will continue, and we will always be there in the short and the long term to ensure that the sovereignty and longevity of Ukraine is sustained. And that I was the Minister of National Defense at the time of the further illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. I saw from that perspective the incursions into the Donbass and the fall of Ukrainian soldiers unjustifiably. How can we now, the question is, how can we, in the coalition of the willing, in the sense of NATO allies, continue the work that we need to do, which is support Ukraine, ensure those security guarantees are in place, and ensure that Ukraine has the future that its people deserve.
Thank you. I'm going to press you gently. It's very admirable, and I understand Canada's position, but in the end, isn't it true that this decision to end this war will not be made in Ottawa, it won't be made in Brussels, it will be made by the President of the United States? How and effectively when this war is ended?
Well, with great respect, if one really adheres to the principle of territorial integrity and state sovereignty, those very principles upon which the international legal order is based, then one must admit that unless Ukraine is at the table, that the resolution would not be just. And I think that is an excellent point, and I think that is what we are facing right now, is perhaps a lack of respect for those exact principles that you're discussing. Senator, I'd like to turn to you. I notice you're wearing a pin. Could you tell us about the pin that you're wearing?
Well, as importantly, I'm wearing colors of Ukraine.
That's true.
And that's intentional. It wasn't accidental. I brought this from the United States for this purpose. So I was in Denmark before I arrived here for 2 days. And I guess
not in Greenland.
I'm sorry?
You didn't go to Nuuk?
Not yet. But to really indicate that I and a number of other members have made it very clear that the way that we're going about projecting power in the Arctic is costly, divisive, and unnecessary. We'll have a different panel discussion about that. But with respect to Ukraine, I completely agree with the minister. I've said from the beginning that there can be no resolution in Ukraine without Ukraine at the table, and actually without Ukraine's criteria for their freedom, for their territorial integrity. Those are all decisions that have to be made by the president, his advisors, and the Ukrainian people. The United States may be able to play a facilitating role, but I think that other NATO members and other European members should also have a say in that, because let's face it, we're talking about European security. We're talking about the security of a country that has a 1,340-mile or 40-kilometer border now. Thank you, Vladimir Putin, for letting us add Sweden and Finland to the mix. Look, Vladimir Putin is a murderer. He's a liar on his best day. And what we're seeing in Ukraine are his worst days. I was in Bucha, I was in Kyiv and Bucha last year after the Munich Security Conference. You can't trust him. We have to have, beyond Ukraine and the United States, we also have to have eyes on it from NATO allies, particularly those in the area, to make sure that we have a lasting and fair peace. But I think we have to look at everything that Vladimir Putin says and run it through a truth filter, because he simply can't be trusted. So this agreement has to be very specific, and there have to be consequences for violating it.
Can I ask you very directly, do you think that all the noise around Greenland, the threats of tariffs, I know we're going to talk about it in other settings, but do you believe that all of this talk about Greenland is to distract from the fact that there was hopefully going to be a deal announced this week and now there isn't?
No, I can never get in the minds of people advising the president, but it certainly hasn't distracted Congress. I think you'll see an appropriations measure in place that will demonstrate financial support for Ukraine that will move through the Senate and the Congress in the coming weeks. In the United States, this president forces us all to be able to walk and chew gum. We can't just be focused on one issue. And I think in this case, we have to continue to focus on the real threat. There's no threat in Greenland, which is why, I think it's something that we need to de-escalate, something that we need to advise the president on a peaceful, more unifying path to achieving his goals, which we can talk about separately. But here the focus is on Ukraine. I think the American people still continue to support Ukraine, and this is an election year. Those who veered too far away may have electoral consequences to deal with, frankly.
And that's what I love about the fact that you're on our panel, because you're not running for election this year.
Yeah, but as I told the minister, if you check my record in the first administration, I was equally outspoken. Here's the point. This is where it's very important. I support the majority of President Trump's policies. I'll give you a good example in Greenland. I support the what, being able to project power in the Arctic. My goodness, anyone in NATO should understand that as a priority. We had Russia and China actually in military exercises in the Arctic for the first time, large-scale military exercises. So clearly, we have to have a power projection platform, and Greenland makes a lot of geographic sense. But you're talking about a territory that has offered for $1 one of their military bases. At the height of our relationship with Greenland and Denmark, we had 17 military operations there. We have one today. For anyone to suggest that in order for us to be present in Greenland and project power, that it requires some financial transaction, which incidentally, as a fiscal conservative, would be more costly than we need to achieve the president's aim. And I think over time, hopefully, we will get the president to recognize that and have the policy that's commensurate with that.
I suppose the argument is that in a world where China, with Russia as a somewhat client state, rising in its power, if the United States does not own that territory, that they could get very severe and serious pushback from a Europe that is wavering between the United States and a very, very powerful China. Anyway, that's
but again, if I can, just briefly,
please weigh in as well.
A part of what we have to, a part of the reason that we're here is President Trump's justifiable frustration with some of our brothers and sisters in NATO who came far short of their investment in our mutual defense over the last 20 years. I've been the Republican leader of the Senate NATO Observer Group for 20 years. Collectively, $2 trillion with a T has not been spent to achieve the minimum that our colleagues should have in NATO. Can you imagine what deterrent effect there would have been if every member of NATO had actually invested the $2 trillion over 20 years? What would that have done for modernization? What would that have done for the industrial base? So I think a part of the president's frustration, and no one can doubt that everyone paying up to the minimum now and now achieving 5% limits, anyone credit anyone other than Donald Trump's not been following current events. Every past president in this century attempted to do it, and they didn't. So I think he's frustrated by that. But that frustration should not transcend into the current policy posture with respect to Greenland. I think we have to de-escalate it, but I hope that this is an important lesson learned by those of us who care about NATO and believe it's the most consequential and important treaty in the history of man. Let's make sure that we don't drift again or we put ourselves in the same sort of vulnerable position that we find ourselves today.
Could I just emphasize the importance of focusing on Ukraine, which is what this panel is about? We have heard from someone from the president's office, in fact, the president of Ukraine's office, Zelensky's office, about the importance of security guarantees and the importance of Ukraine deciding its own sovereign future. And I think the onus is on us to ensure that we are supporting Ukraine as it enters, yet another year. We're almost 4 years on since the further illegal invasion. And we need to seek a resolution, and we need to ensure that Ukraine's at the table in that process. So the real question, if this is truly a panel about Ukraine, the real question is how we can support this process. I agree with you. We don't hold the levers to ensure that a ceasefire occurs ourselves. But that doesn't mean that we withdraw and do nothing. In fact, what it means is we search for the means by which we can assist and ensure that the rule of law and that territorial integrity, meaning the geographical boundaries of Ukraine, remain intact.
I agree completely.
I'd like to turn to Mr. Budanov and bring the focus back, as you rightly say we should. Would it be fair to say that today Russia is winning the war?
Дивіться. Ні, вона не може зараз, не можна констатувати, що вона виграє чи виграла, бо інакше, в принципі, цієї розмови б не було. Якщо є факт констатації виграшу, так, а про що говорити далі? Але ж, вочевидь, всі бачать, що перемовний процес триває. Я трошки хотів би задати певну ремарку, як то кажуть, попереднім спікерам. Мені здається, трошки не досить коректно ви кажете, коли говорите про те, що Україна має мати місце за столом перемовин і так далі. Так ми в перемовному процесі, я ж вам про це сказав з самого початку. Я приїхав сюди, от я вам прямо кажу, з Майамі, де вели підготовчу роботу з представниками президента Трампа. Всім відомо, з ким, в принципі, я не думаю, що слід про це знову нагадувати. Ми в процесі, зрозумійте це правильно. Цей процес, слава Богу, не йде без нас. Але так само, повертаючись до питання Росії, треба пам'ятати, що ми не можемо виконати її просто з цього процесу. Пробували, бачите, не вийшло. 4-й рік, не вийшло. А насправді 12-й. Треба зрозуміти, що є неприємні люди, є неприємні країни, можливо, навіть. Але ж заплющення очей на це не допоможе. Ми маємо мати з ними справу, на жаль. Так сталося, що нам прийдеться це робити. І прийшлося це робити. Я якраз дуже вдячний, перш за все, Сполученим Штатам і всім країнам, які, перш за все, Європи, Канади в тому числі. Не подумайте, що я вас якось ігнорую. всім, хто всі ці роки нам допомагав і допомагає. І нам буде потрібна зараз ваша допомога. Вона насправді буде потрібна підтримка, бо без вашої залученості в цей процес наша позиція ще більше послабиться. А зі слабкою позицією, знову ж таки, говорити буде досить таки проблематично. В принципі, неможливо. Тому, будь ласка, будьте з нами, давайте відхилимо трошки всі ці непорозуміння, які є між країнами, які весь цей час нам допомагали, акумулюємо зусилля, мобілізуємось і доведемо справу до кінця. Нам потрібен справедливий мир, все правильно. Потрібні гарантії безпеки, потрібен план відбудови, відновлення України. Але чвари всередині не допоможуть. Ось вам моя відповідь.
Can I ask you a follow-on question, which is that what is it, do you think that Vladimir Putin will be satisfied with some territorial concessions, a cessation of hostilities, and a promise that Ukraine in the foreseeable future will not join NATO? Or do you think that will be a holding position for Russia to and embolden Vladimir Putin and his administration to restart the hostilities at a future date, not too far in the future?
Це питання перемовин, знову ж таки. Так, це по-перше. По-друге, що стосується НАТО, ну зрозуміло, що для Російської Федерації це найбільш сталий такий аргумент, яким вони всі ці роки, а це, хочу всім нагадати, вже 12 років, виправдовують факт вторгнення в Україну. Це почалося з окупації Автономної Республіки Крим, коли головним приводом було використано тезу, дві тези. Перша, що корінні зв'язки з народом російським, що досить таки взагалі дивно звучить. І друга, основна, на якій робився акцент, це убезпечення Російської Федерації від НАТО. Бо з затвердженням їх пропаганди вже були підготовлені плани по заведенню натівських сил в Крим, і вони нібито мусили робити те, що вони зробили з анексією, для того, щоб цьому запобігти. Далі пішов Донбас, там тематика НАТО використовувалась трошки поверхнево, і далі але використовувалась. І далі наступив вже етап широкомасштабного вторгнення 22-го року, в якому, знову ж таки, однією з основних причин називалося, скажімо так, твердження, що вони рятують Росію від розширення НАТО на схід, що за логікою Російської Федерації, тобто приєднання України, що за логікою Російської Федерації несе ідеологічну, навіть можна сказати, і екзистенційну загрозу для існування Російської Федерації. Тому чи буде Росія наполягати на тому, щоб Україна не стала членом НАТО, точно буде наполягати. Що з цього вийде, давайте подивимось. Будь-який перемовний процес, він взагалі-то любить тишу, але частково ви все одно будете всі це бачити.
Minister Vалтонен, I want to ask you your analysis on Vladimir Putin. I know you're going to tell me who knows, and you can't understand the Russian perspective, but what do you think his ultimate goal is? Is it genuinely the reconstitution of the great Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire? Do you think that if he achieves at least some of his aims in Ukraine, that the Baltics could be threatened next?
Well, I guess he has been quite outspoken about his goals. He published his writing, was it back in 21? And that certainly not only was about reestablishing the Soviet Empire, but certainly also limiting also the posture of NATO and all this. But I have to say, because Russians typically use this narrative of NATO being a threat to them, which obviously is complete complete bollocks. If you
Technical term.
yes, if you now think about when Finland and Sweden joined NATO 3 years ago, there hasn't been less troops behind the Finnish border to Russia in the past 3 years than basically for decades. If NATO was such a massive threat, why have the troops in Ukraine? Why not bring them back to the border? So, of course, that is simply a narrative that Russia has been pushing to justify this and that, that they operate, which is fully against the UN Charter. And what comes to the previous discussion, I actually do agree both with Senator Tillis and Minister Anand in this. Well, yes, we need a just peace for Ukraine, but at the same time, we need to be fortifying NATO. And that is because I'm not seeing the threat of Russia going away with any peace deal, especially if it's not a good peace deal. The Russian threat probably will be there for, I don't know, for the foreseeable future, and it will be affecting the entire transatlantic alliance. We do see the Russian threat certainly from the Arctic. They are active in Africa, and of course they are active where, you know, they have the possibility and the interest to do so. But together, if we invest decisively into our defense and deterrence, then certainly there's nothing that can keep us from winning. And also, finally, on the question whether Russia was winning on Ukraine, certainly no. I mean, if you were winning, you wouldn't be abducting children or having people freeze in their apartments when it's minus 15 outside. They are certainly not winning, and I think Ukrainians have all the right, not just to assume that they will have the freedom that they have been fighting for, but that will come. I'm more than certain about it.
I've been having some interesting discussions here in Davos last couple of days, and one of the arguments I've heard is that NATO is done, NATO is over, and that we are seeing the just dissolution of this, as you say, very important treaty that has lasted since, you know, for a long time, and that we're seeing the birth of something new. Maybe call it a board of peace, call it what you like. But how much do you think that argument rings true to any of you on the panel? So.
Well, Canada is a founding member of NATO, and maybe I'll just start, and I'm sure others have valuable things to say. I will admit there is no doubt that NATO is facing challenges now as it seeks to ensure that there's unity in NATO, as well as the concept of collective defense and deterrence is actually effective in practice. That doesn't mean that NATO dissolves. It means that NATO rises to the challenge to meet the moment. And I have been continuously pressing the point that NATO, as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, needs to not only have a focus on the eastern flank of Europe, but also on the northern and western flanks, because as we all agree, the threat from Russia in the Arctic and beyond is undeniable. And if NATO is going to meet this moment, it needs also to develop the strategy to do so. And that's what my conversations with the Nordic Five and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, have been about. What is the strategy to meet the moment? NATO needs that strategy.
Feel free to weigh in on this topic of NATO defunct or not. I'm going to throw another question in there, and I'm going to address it to you, Mr. Budanov. How important, from your perspective, is the role of China? Because if you listen to the US administration, but if you also look at the facts, I've talked to the heads of several Western intelligence agencies who say that if China was not supporting Russia today with technological, military, logistical support, Russia would not have been able to continue to fight up until this point. So how important, from your perspective, and others can weigh in, is the role of China in this conflict?
Дякую вам за це питання. Питання ваше, знаєте, воно більше філософське, насправді. Ну, як зараз, в 26-му році, відповісти на питання, так, а як би все відбувалося, якщо б Китаю там не було? Чи якби його роль була абсолютно інакша? Я думаю, ви з цим твердженням погодитесь. Значить, тепер стосовно, скажімо так, реальної ролі Китаю у всьому цьому процесі. Я буду приводити просто, мабуть, перелік прикладів, і кожен нехай робить з цього свій висновок. Якщо пригадати перший період широкомасштабного вторгнення після 22-го року, у світовій пресі дуже багато, в період весни, літа 22-го року, було статей, різних там відеозаписів, колонок авторських про те, як з Китаю в Росію, інколи навіть військовими бортами доправляли тисячами пральні машинки, різні там комп'ютери і так далі, так далі, так далі. Це все відбувалося, вибачте, через те, що різко з'явилась критична необхідність у різного роду контролерах, мікросхемах і так далі, які, до речі, напряму в перші дні війни Китай не продавав. Це теж просто є факт. Далі Китай зрозумів, як всім цим користуватись, а Росія, оскільки як агресор виявилася під ще більшими обмеженнями, ніж була, почала шукати шляхи виходу з цієї ситуації. Цілком очевидно, що вона через бізнес-канали при, скажімо так, мовчазній згоді зверху знайшла надійного партнера для того, щоб мати надійні канали постачання. Перш за все електроніки, компонентів електроніки, потім пішли верстати, потім пішли різні матеріали, з яких робляться ті чи інші елементи озброєнь і так далі, і так далі. Тобто ця кооперація посилювалася. Росія за це платила величезні кошти, набагато більші, ніж будь-яка країна за такі товари до того платила, але в них не було, в принципі, іншого варіанту. Далі Китай почав користуватися цією ситуацією, чи можна звинувачувати і в цьому. Знову ж таки, питання філософське. З'явилася можливість надзаробітків, просто величезних. Після цього пішла політична частина, вони почали, скажімо так, мати ще більший вплив на Російську Федерацію. Чим більше працювали санкції і тиск ззовні, тим більше Росія, в принципі, йшла в руки Китаю. Що, зрештою, зараз вже всі просто неприкрито бачать. Що з цим робити далі? Питання, оце і є основне питання. Тому що зараз вже пішов обмін військовими технологіями з Росії до Китаю. Китай, до речі, не передав жодної готової одиниці озброєння. Як би ми там не ставились до Китаю, гарно чи погано, але він цього не зробив. Жодної готової одиниці озброєння він не передав, і це просто теж є фактом. Чи використав він це для збагачення своєї країни, я маю на увазі Китай, і посилення впливу на Російську Федерацію, і чи, зрештою, вони поглинають цю Російську Федерацію? Так, це є. Це є. Росіянам боляче це визнавати, але вони це теж знають. Вони чудово це знають. Сподіваюся, я відповів на ваше питання.
Well, first off, I won't get into details because it was a question back. Russia is losing. The reason why the Russians are at the table, Putin's at the table, is because we've proven that NATO technology is superior to them. We've proven that their non-commissioned officers are inferior and going to take a decade to actually get back to the level that we enjoy every day in NATO and in the United States. So I think that that's very important. China, in many respects, is the #1 winner if Russia wins in Ukraine. Russia does want to recreate the empire. Putin is afraid of losing relevance. He's losing relevance because he's a failure, and he's failing the Russian people. He's failing in Ukraine. China is, I agree, not supplying material, but they're supplying support. And they know that a successful Russia probably has an end very similar to what was suggested here. The Chinese people are also taking advantage. I know we're going to stay on Ukraine, but they're taking advantage of this moment with NATO, the tumult that we're experiencing in NATO. It's not a secret that they have an open door to someone from your neck of the woods just recently to talk about economic ties. I think that was probably an appropriate discussion to have among world leaders, but make no mistake about it, that's just another economic tentacle that China wants to spread across the globe to ultimately not democratize the world, but to see the world evolve into their end state. So I think that we have to be just realistic about it. We want good, strong economic ties with China and with other nations, but we also have to recognize them for what they are. They are cheering Russia along, at least silently, and are hopeful for the day that they succeed there. And success in Ukraine immediately threatens Moldova, the Balkans, and we know the game plan. This is fairly straightforward. I'm going to be traveling to Moldova after the Munich Security Conference. We have National Guardsmen there. We have a relationship with Moldova. Thank God they won the elections there. Russia tried to do everything else through hybrid warfare that's occurring across the globe. They did everything they could. It's a very positive sign that the Moldovan people got what they wanted out of their election, but make no mistake about it, Russia's malign influence, with China being a cheerleader, is an everyday occurrence since February of 2022.
I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question. Maybe I'll go to the very back to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm from Ukraine, the only one Ukrainian representing global shapers here. Davos 40. I have the question, first of all, thank you for being so supportive. Thank you for saying it with Ukraine. That's something we need very much. But the question is about how or what should Ukrainians, I don't know, Office of the President, youth, community, NGOs still do to mobilize this international support? I mean, to reach real fair peace, because I'm, of course, questioning if this might be a real one. I'm sorry for being a bit critical.
Okay.
I wish it would be.
So the question is, how should NGOs, how could
in terms of reaching real fair peace?
Okay. Would you like to answer?
No, in general, in the panel, I would say from the international community.
Okay. Do you have any suggestion?
Well,
Я думаю, да. Давайте з вас почнемо.
Yeah, please.
No,
No,
let's
go ahead.
please. After you.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, didn't want to hijack the answer, but well, today, for instance, I've used every bilateral I've had to also rally support for Ukraine, and at the same time rally support for the UN Charter, the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of nations. And I think, depending a little bit how you put it with the partner across the globe you discuss it with, I think it's very easy to find friends for exactly these two principles. And even if you add the freedom of people or human rights, that's of course not interpreted the same way everywhere around the world. That's certainly that we should be doing. But unfortunately, we have seen that over the course of the past 4 years, and Russia is really making use of this, since global attention has shifted to so many other places too, away from Ukraine, then perhaps that has taken something away from the sort of the feeling of urgency to help Ukraine. Whereas, again, we saw last night with the strikes in so many cities across Ukraine. I mean, the need is there now. So I think it's an obligation not just to Ukraine, but to the global community to rally support.
Yeah, please.
Давайте я ще трошки додам. Дивіться, якщо ми виходимо з того, що ми, як цивілізована країна, Україна все ж таки точно є цивілізованою державою, живемо в парадигмі людиноцентричній, де життя, свобода і так далі, людини ставляться понад усе, а далі вже йде все підпорядковано цьому, то тоді стає зрозуміло. Все, про що ви, в принципі, в вашому запиті є сама відповідь. Ви представниця громадянського суспільства. От ви ставите питання, як можна допомогти там, і так далі, і так далі. Так допомагайте, будь ласка. Наша громада, мається на увазі українська, вона існує в кожній державі світу. Я, як колишній керівник розвідки, можу вас просто закидати цифрами по різних країнах, але, думаю, ви самі це чудово знаєте. Будь ласка, працюйте разом з ними, об'єднуйте їх. Україні потрібна допомога. Це ж ні для кого не секрет. Україні потрібна допомога абсолютно в всіх сферах. Починаючи від, вибачте, донатів на озброєння, на війну і на допомогу пораненим там, і людям, які втратили все в цій війні, завершуючи, може це трошки некрасиво звучить, але впливом громад через тих людей, які вже давно асимілювалися на політиків в тих країнах, де вони живуть. І це разом допоможе.
Thank you very much, and I think that is the perfect moment on which to end this fabulous panel. I want to thank my excellent panelists for your contributions. I want to thank those of you watching on the live stream and everybody in the room, and happy Davos. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good luck with the next year.
Yeah.